Other than the first free Sword Dao Divine Inscription, you will have to use contribution points to exchange for new Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagrams. Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagrams are divided into 3 grades: beginner, mid-grade and high-grade. The worst beginner Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram requires 100,000 contribution points. The best one requires over 100 million contribution points, and the worst mid-grade one requires 1 billion contribution points. The best one requires over 50 billion contribution points, not to mention the high-grade one. I see. Hearing Dan Yun Sword Saint's explanation, Yi Chen also felt that he would never have enough contribution points. Although he had already comprehended an initial grade floating blood divine inscription, Yi Chen also knew that it wasn't enough. In the future, he would definitely have to comprehend mid-grade divine inscriptions, or even high-grade ones. Dan Yun Sword Saint continued, "In our Sword God Palace, there are over 1,000 initial grade Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagrams. Although I'm untalented, I've already comprehended 15 initial grade divine inscriptions. Normally speaking, the more initial grade divine inscriptions you comprehend, the higher the chances of comprehending a mid-grade one. If not, even if you were given a mid-grade divine inscription diagram, you might not be able to comprehend it." Yes, Yi Chen nodded. This is the Saint Weapon Pagoda. Other than Saint Swords, there are all kinds of Saint Weapons here. This is the Mission Pagoda. As long as you have enough contribution points, you can issue missions of a certain difficulty. For example, asking people to help you search for materials, asking people to help you uncover secrets. The area of the initial grade Sword Saint Island was extremely vast. After a few months, Dan Yun Sword Saint finally brought Yi Chen across half of the island. This is the Sword Discourse Arena. Your luck isn't bad. Sword Saint Snowheart is currently practicing her initial grade divine inscriptions. Today, the two of them arrived at a gigantic island. In the center of the island, there was a square-shaped platform. On the platform, a female Sword Saint was currently practicing her swordsmanship. Around the platform, a sea of people could be seen. The swordsmanship I'm practicing now is the initial grade divine inscription diagram I comprehended from the 128th initial grade Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram. Watch carefully. The silver-haired Sword Saint Snowheart had pointy ears and a tall stature. She held her breath and slashed out with her sword. In the air, snowflakes danced as a teardrop of sword chi pierced through the air. This teardrop was extremely inconspicuous. It didn't emit any energy fluctuations at all. Yet it contained a soul-stirring might. From afar, Yi Chen could already feel his Yuan Shun being pierced through. He believed that it was the same for the others. Yi Chen's countenance changed. The Snowheart Sword Saint was the same as the Sweet Dew Sword Saint. Both of them were powerful demigods. However, the Snowheart Sword Saint seemed to be much stronger than the Sweet Dew Sword Saint. They weren't even on the same level. The symbol of a powerful demigod was their god force and law energy. However, the difference in strength was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. For example, a demigod who had just condensed his god force and comprehended one law energy was a powerful demigod. A demigod who had condensed his god force and comprehended 10 laws energy was also a powerful demigod. Even among powerful demigods, the difference in their comprehensions of the divine arts would also be huge. The Dan Yun Sword Saint sighed in admiration. He then explained to Yi Chen, "Don't be so shocked. The Snowheart Sword Saint is an ultimate sword saint." Ultimate sword saint? Yi Chen looked at Sword Saint Dan Yun. In the Sword God Palace, there are only 4 ranks of Sword Saint: Elementary Sword Saint, Intermediate Sword Saint, Advanced Sword Saint, and Ultimate Sword Saint. The first 3 ranks are related to one's cultivation, and the prerequisite to becoming an Ultimate Sword Saint is to be an Advanced Sword Saint. Not only must one condense divinity, but all other aspects must also be perfected. For example, one must reach the peak of the 9th Order Sword Intent, the peak of the 9th Order Sword Domain, and the perfection of the 9th Order Spirit Body. Most importantly, one must comprehend complementary laws such as the law of life and death, the law of yin and yang, and the law of the 5 elements. In the Sword God Palace, he is an ultimate sword saint. In the other real god forces, he is an ultimate battle saint. However, in terms of power, our sword god Palace's ultimate sword saint is outstanding. Dan Yin Sword Saint's eyes were filled with pride. He was proud of sword god Palace. Perfection in every aspect and perfection in the laws as well. He is indeed worthy of being called an ultimate sword saint. Yichen nodded. If he had to put it in perspective, ultimate sword saints and ultimate battle saints were equivalent to peak powerful demigods. The threshold to become a powerful demigod was very low. As long as one condensed god force and comprehended the laws, one would be a powerful demigod. The threshold to become an ultimate sword saint or ultimate battle saint was ridiculously high. Chapter 1466. This is the elementary grade divine art I comprehended from the 160th elementary grade divine inscription diagram. Sky blue. This is the elementary grade divine art I comprehended from the 172nd elementary grade divine inscription diagram. Suspended sound sword. Sword Saint Snowheart performed dozens of primary godly skills in one breath. He performed each skill 9 times. During these 9 times, sometimes it was fast, sometimes it was slow, sometimes it was fast, sometimes it was slow, sometimes it was fast, and sometimes it was slow. Sometimes it was split up and performed in segments. He tried his best to let the audience see it clearly, to reduce the difficulty of comprehending it. Sword Saint Scarlet Cloud. How many elementary grade divine arts has Sword Saint Snowheart comprehended? Yichen exclaimed. Sword Saint Scarlet Cloud replied. According to what I know, a few million years ago, Sword Saint Snowheart comprehended over 200 elementary grade divine arts. I wonder if he has comprehended any new elementary grade divine arts in the past few million years. Not only that, Sword Saint Snowheart has comprehended 6 mid-grade divine arts. In terms of strength, he can be considered as one of the strongest ultimate sword saints in our sword god Palace. Amazing! Yichen sighed in admiration. He had spent 25,000 years to comprehend the elementary grade divine art, drifting blood. But even now, he had yet to completely perfect it. Yichen didn't need to ask to know that Sword Saint Snowheart had already comprehended over 200 elementary grade divine arts. If not, he wouldn't have taken them out to show off. Yichen didn't leave. He carefully observed Sword Saint Snowheart's performance of the elementary grade divine arts. Although it was the same divine inscription diagram, every sword saint would comprehend different elementary grade divine arts. But no matter what, they all originated from the same source. Watching others executing their divine arts, one would more or less gain some insights and inspiration. Within 10 days, Sword Saint Snowheart demonstrated a total of 272 elementary grade divine arts. That was an average of 20 to 30 elementary grade divine arts per day. After he finished, Sword Saint Snowheart departed. Haha, my sword Qi Danxia is finally perfected. The Dan Cloud Sword Saint laughed uproariously. The sword Qi Rosy Glow was the initial grade divine inscription he comprehended from the 350th set of divine inscriptions. The higher the number, the more difficult it was to comprehend. But correspondingly, the power of the divine inscriptions would also be greater. Generally speaking, no initial grade sword saint would be willing to slowly comprehend an initial grade divine inscription according to the number of the divine inscriptions. If they did that, the increase in their strength would be too slow. For example, there was basically no difference between the first and second divine inscriptions. Hence, the majority of initial grade sword saints were the same as the Dan Cloud Sword Saint. They would choose 1 or 2 of the more difficult initial grade divine inscriptions to comprehend. At this current stage, I shouldn't focus on breaking through. Such matters can't be rushed. I should earn more contribution points to exchange for the initial grade divine inscription diagrams. According to what the Sweet Dew Sword Saint said, comprehending divine arts is also a kind of tempering for one's body. Maybe when one comprehended an initial grade divine art, their cultivation base would naturally break through. Yichen silently mused. After spending a few more months, the Dan Cloud Sword Saint brought Yichen around the entire initial grade Sword Saint Island region. After which, the two of them parted ways, and Yichen returned to the Green Lotus Island. 5,000 years later, Yichen's initial grade divine art, Drifting Blood, was finally perfected. His strength rose to another level. It's time to challenge the Sword God Pagoda. Yi Chen wanted to see how many floors of the Sword God Tower he could reach with his current strength. The Dan Cloud Sword Saint reached the 14th level. There were a total of 4 Sword God Pagodas. The first one was located in the initial Great Island region and had 9 levels. The second one was located in the Mid-Great Island region and had 18 levels. The third one was located in the High Great Island region and had 27 levels. The fourth one was located in the core region of the Sword God Palace and had 36 levels. Yi Chen first arrived at the first Sword God Pagoda in the initial Great Island region. As soon as he arrived, Yi Chen saw an initial grade sword saint leaving dejectedly. Clearly, he had failed the challenge. In the Sword God Palace, initial grade sword saints were the least numerous. This was because those who could become members of the Sword God Palace were all extremely talented and could quickly become intermediate grade sword saints. Of course, there were also some cases where some heaven-defying cultivators with extremely good aptitudes had the opportunity to join the Sword God Palace. As a result, they needed a long time to improve in the early stages. After all, there were very few people like Yi Chen. Not only was Yi Chen an initial grade sword saint as soon as he entered, but he also comprehended the law of complementation. It should be known that most high-grade sword saints, such as the Sweet Dew Sword Saint and the Shadowless Sword Saint, did not comprehend the law of complementation. After taking a deep breath, Yi Chen arrived at the first level of the Sword God Pagoda. Each level of the Sword God Pagoda was guarded by a puppet sword saint. If he wanted to pass through, he had to defeat the puppet sword saint. To Yi Chen, the puppet sword saint on the first level was too weak. With just a light strike, Yi Chen defeated it and arrived at the second level. After 10 minutes, Yi Chen passed the first level of the Sword God Pagoda. Ring! A sword ring rang out, and the Sword God Pagoda shone brightly. In the elementary Sword Saint Island region, many initial grade sword saints looked over from afar. Another person passed the 9th level. The 9th level is not very difficult. I have already made it to the 11th level. I wonder which level this person can reach. Most initial grade sword saints could make it to the 9th level. Hence, it was not surprising that people often passed the 9th level. One had to apply to enter the intermediate Sword Saint Island region. 3 days later, Yi Chen was allowed to enter the intermediate Sword Saint Island region. Yi Chen walked in front of the second Sword God Pagoda. He was allowed to pass through the first 9 levels. The 10th level, the 11th level, the 12th level. Yi Chen passed all the way to the 13th level in one go. Although the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had comprehended 15 types of divine arts, his overall strength was not much stronger than Yi Chen. This was because the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had only comprehended 2 types of divine arts. They were the divine arts of water and divine arts of fire. When he reached the 13th level, Yi Chen was finally stalled. Even after activating the 5 elemental divine arts, he was still unable to defeat the Puppet Sword Saint. The Puppet Sword Saint's attack was only slightly weaker than Yi Chen when he went all out, and Yi Chen's 5 elemental divine arts could not be sustained for long. Pooh! After dispersing the 5 elemental divine arts, Yi Chen was sent flying by the Puppet Sword Saint. He failed to pass the 13th level. A total of 499,500 contribution points. A satisfied smile appeared on Yi Chen's face. It was already very good to have such a result on his first time in the Sword God Pagoda. The contribution points were also sufficient to exchange for 1 or 2 of the 4 elementary Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagrams. The first elementary Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram required 100,000 contribution points, the second 200,000 contribution points, the third 300,000 contribution points, the fourth 1,000,000 contribution points, so on and so forth. Back then, the elementary Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram that Yi Chen comprehended was not bad. It was the 5th one. After considering for a moment, Yi Chen decided to exchange for the first elementary Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram. Everything had to be done from the beginning. It was not a good habit to bite off more than one could chew. Only with a solid foundation would one be able to comprehend divine arts faster and faster. The first elementary Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram required 100,000 contribution points. There were still slightly over 300,000 left. Chapter 1467. The first beginner sword pattern was a few clouds. Above the clouds there was nothing, and the space below the clouds was shrinking rapidly. Looking at this picture, Yichen could not help but feel a sense of pride and heroism. As expected of a sword pattern, it can even affect my mood. Yichen couldn't help but think. Time passed slowly. Yichen spent most of his time comprehending the first beginner sword Dao pattern. The rest of his time was spent drinking with the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint, or going out for a walk. Occasionally, he would use the God Transfer Array to go to the Ancient Fragrance Castle and the Beast God Valley. Of course, using the God Transfer Array would cost him 10,000 contribution points. It was not a lot, but it was not a small amount either. If he used it frequently, it would be quite a burden. Green Lotus Sword Saint, Green Lotus Sword Saint. Today, Sword Saint Dan Yin came to Green Lotus Island. Sword Saint Dan Yin, what's up? Yichen walked out of the palace. Sword Saint Dan Yin laughed. I'm here to say goodbye. I'm afraid we won't be able to see each other often in the future. Hearing this, Yichen glanced at Sword Saint Dan Yin. You've become an intermediate sword saint, no wonder. Since intermediate sword saints lived on the islands, they wouldn't be able to see each other often. I was lucky. After I perfected the beginner technique, Sword Qi Danxia, I felt like I was about to break through. I've been stuck at this level for millions of years. Sword Saint Dan Yin was happy and emotional. He was different from Yichen. When he joined the Sword God Palace, he was just a heaven-defying cultivator. Now he was already an intermediate sword saint. His strength was comparable to ordinary demigods. No matter what, congratulations. Yichen clasped his hands and congratulated. Sword Saint Dan Yin laughed. I hope you can become an intermediate sword saint as soon as possible. At that time, we'll be able to meet each other often. Thank you. I hope so. Yichen had more opportunities than Sword Saint Dan Yin, but he wasn't sure if he could become an intermediate sword saint in a short period of time. He could only take one step at a time, and let nature take its course. The two of them stayed together for a few days. After that, Sword Saint Dan Yin moved to the intermediate sword saint island. Day after day, year after year, Yichen had been in the Heaven Domain's Sword God Palace for 45,000 years. He had also been comprehending the first elementary Sword Dao Divine Rune Diagram for 20,000 years. Success! According to the first beginner-level Sword Dao Divine Vein Diagram, Yichen comprehended a new beginner-level divine technique, Soaring Clouds. The moment he comprehended Ling Yin, something strange happened to Yichen's body. His golden martial arts primordial spirit emerged from his body and burst forth with an eternal golden light. His body floated up involuntarily like a god. At this moment, Yichen naturally advanced to become an intermediate-level sword saint. The god blood in his body was constantly being refined and consumed, nourishing his martial yuan soul. Intermediate sword saints were the most common group in the Sword God Palace. Without a fortuitous encounter, it was impossible to advance to advanced sword saint in hundreds of millions of years. Not everyone could obtain divine blood, and not everyone could use divine blood to break through to advanced sword saint. Most people could only use the long years to temper themselves and slowly improve. Green Lotus Sword Saint, why did you come to the intermediate Sword Saint Island region? Wait, you've already become an intermediate level sword saint? Damn, this is too exaggerated. How long has it been? Seeing Yichen again, Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint was astonished. Yichen smiled. I've reached the critical point for a long time. Recently, I comprehended a divine technique and naturally broke through. To a demigod, 15,000 years could only be considered a short period of time. That's right, you are different from us. You've already established your foundation in the primal chaos battlefield. Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint quickly accepted this fact. Sometimes, comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Fortuitous encounters were the same. You haven't attempted the Sword God Pagoda yet, right? Hurry up and try. I've already passed the 16th level. Not bad, right? The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had a smug look on his face. Passing through the 14th to the 16th level had given him more than 5 million contribution points. This was more than all the contribution points he had accumulated in the past combined. There was nothing he could do about it. The stronger he was, the more contribution points he would get, and the more contribution points he would get. For example, the Ultimate Sword Saints group had contribution points in the hundreds of millions. A few million was nothing to them. Not bad. I'll go challenge the Sword God Pagoda then. Before this, Yi Chen had already chosen the island to stay on. Now he came to greet Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint. Without any surprises, Yi Chen passed the 13th level of the Sword God Pagoda. The higher one's cultivation, the more powerful the divine technique would be. The Sword Saint puppet on the 13th level couldn't even withstand 3 strikes from Yi Chen. It was a world of difference from the first time he challenged the Sword God Pagoda. Soon, he passed the 14th level as well. Level 15. So powerful. Yi Chen used all his strength, but still couldn't defeat the Sword Saint puppet on the 14th level. He could only slightly suppress it. Usually, a victor wouldn't be determined in such a situation. If it was a battle of attrition, Yi Chen might not be able to defeat the Sword Saint puppet. The opponent was a puppet, and could endlessly obtain energy from the Sword God Pagoda. Left with no choice, Yi Chen left the Sword God Pagoda. He couldn't pass the 15th level. Luckily he had a lot of contribution points. He obtained another one. 2 million contribution points. Adding the contribution points from before, he had 5 million contribution points. With so many contribution points in hand, Yi Chen naturally wouldn't hide them. He exchanged for the 2nd, 3rd and 4th level divine pattern diagrams, spending 900,000 contribution points. I still don't have enough contribution points and divine stones. Otherwise, I could get more 4-star Sky Saint treasured swords and upgrade the Firmament sword to 5 or 6 stars. The Sword God Palace had all kinds of Earth Saint treasured swords. However, Sky Saint treasured swords couldn't be exchanged because everyone needed Sky Saint treasured swords. Of course, everyone needed Earth Saint treasured swords even more. Sky Saint treasured swords were ultimately Earth Saint treasured swords. The reason why there were so many Earth Saint treasured swords was because the Sword God Palace had a sword forging divine tool. This sword forging divine tool could unceasingly forge Earth Saint treasured swords. Currently, Yi Chen had close to 300 divine stones. If he was lucky, he might be able to upgrade the Firmament sword to a 5-star Sky Saint treasure. However, this was too risky. For Sky Saint treasured swords, the failure rate would be much higher with every star. If he failed, if he was lucky, he would only damage the origin of the sword. If he was unlucky, the Sky Saint treasured sword would directly explode. Yi Chen gave up on this idea. For the 2nd elementary sword Dao divine pattern diagram, Yi Chen spent 21,000 years to comprehend a divine technique. For the 3rd elementary sword Dao divine pattern, he spent 23,000 years. For the 4th elementary sword Dao divine pattern diagram, he spent 23,000 years to comprehend a divine technique. So far, Yi Chen had comprehended a total of 5 divine techniques. Among them, the most powerful one was still Drifting Blood. After all, Drifting Blood was a divine technique comprehended from the 5th elementary sword Dao divine pattern diagram. Green Lotus Sword Saint, let's go to Sword Heart Island together. During these years, Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had already formed a habit. Every time he went to Sword Heart Island, he would drag Yi Chen along. There was a stone tablet on Sword Heart Island. On the stone tablet was the word sword, personally written by the Sword God. The word sword, in the Sword God Palace on the Scarlet Continent, was merely a projection. The word sword, written by the Sword God, was extremely profound. But correspondingly, it was also very powerful. Ordinary elementary sword saints wouldn't be able to enter Sword Heart Island. Although Yi Chen and Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint could enter, they couldn't stay for too long. They weren't able to endure the power of the word for too long. Other than that, after leaving Sword Heart Island, it would take a very long time before they could return. The power of the word would remain in their bodies for a very long time. Entering Sword Heart Island without waiting for it to dissipate would be an extremely foolish act. Chapter 1468. Sword Heart Island was vast and boundless. It was as big as the chaotic land. On the east side of Sword Heart Island stood a stone stele. This stone stele was huge, and it was 1,000,000 jong tall. On the stone stele, there was a black word sword. The word sword was like a living creature, constantly moving about as if it was executing a peerless sword art. However, upon closer inspection, the word sword had not moved at all. The word sword was special. It seemed to be able to transmit images through time and space. No matter how far it was, it could be seen. Of course, the farther away it was, the less power it had to bear. Correspondingly, it would be less enlightened. In front of the stone stele, there were many seats arranged in a fan shape. They were simple cushions. The cushions were far away from each other, so they wouldn't disturb others. There were thousands of rows. Yi Chen and Sword Saint stopped at the 2,500th row. Yi Chen said, "Sword Saint, I want to go a bit further." "Alright, don't force yourself." The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had already gotten used to this. Although Yi Chen's overall power was not as strong as his ability to endure the power of the word was much stronger than his. In fact, the Sword Saint could still move forward a few hundred rows, but that would be close to his limit. It would be very hard to comprehend the word when he was close to his limit, and he would not be able to maintain it for a long time. Sword Saint found a seat nearby and sat down cross-legged. He started to look at the word. The word was too powerful. The entire Sword Heart Island felt like it was covered in mercury. The air was as heavy as water. Every step forward was a burden. Yi Chen stopped at the 1,800th row. Before condensing godly power, Yi Chen could only reach this point. If he went any further, he wouldn't be able to concentrate. Those who were in front of him were all sword saints who had condensed godly power. The word sword, written by the sword god, was boundlessly profound, as if it was the origin of the sword Tao. Looking at the word sword could not only improve one's heart energy, it could improve other aspects as well. Of course, this improvement couldn't be achieved overnight. It was like the absorption of nutrients. The better the absorption, the more nutrients one would absorb. As for those who couldn't absorb it well, they would still be able to improve after a long period of accumulation. Sensing the power of the word, Yi Chen tried his best to observe the word, trying to understand its profoundness. After 100 years, the Dan Yin Sword Saint left. Many people left, but many people came. The number of people didn't change much. It's Sword Saint Limitless. Sword Saint Limitless is here. A voice somehow reached Yi Chen's ears. Shifting his gaze away from the word, Yi Chen raised his head. A figure flew across the sky. This figure was not very tall and bald, but his back and shoulders were very wide and thick. He wore a gray robe and had a kind face. His eyes were very gentle, but this kind of gentleness was not one without anger. Instead, it was a gentleness that had seen through everything. Infinite Sword Saint, Yi Chen thought to himself. Limitless Sword Saint was one of the two ultimate sword saints of Sword God Palace. Apart from idealistic Sword Saint, he was the existence closest to the true God realm of Sword Tao. Of course, before becoming a true God, he was still in the realm of Sword Saint. His temperament was vastly different from that of a true God. Yi Chen quickly retracted his attention and continued reading the word. After 50 years, Yi Chen stood up. I have surpassed my limit. Yi Chen flew towards the exit of Sword Heart Island as fast as lightning. Every time he came to Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen would push himself to his limit and then surpass it. It was very dangerous. If he was lucky, he would go mad. If he was not lucky, his mind would break. It had happened before. The reason why Yi Chen dared to do this was because he didn't think it was as dangerous as he thought it would be. The limit of life wasn't fixed. Sometimes you thought it was your limit, but as long as you had a strong will, you could break it. Of course, don't overestimate your will. There was a limit to everything. The real danger was in this limit. If you could control it well, it wouldn't be too dangerous, and you could improve quickly. If you didn't, something bad would happen sooner or later. I've improved again. After leaving Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen sensed that his heart power was more condensed. When it was condensed to the extreme, it would give birth to the light of the soul, which was the sword of the soul. Mission Tower. Thousands of missions would be issued in the mission tower every day. According to the difficulty, the missions were divided into 9 levels. From low to high, they were 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and the hardest 9 star. 1 star to 3 star missions corresponded to sword saints who hadn't condensed God power. 4 star to 6 star missions corresponded to sword saints who had condensed God power. 7 star to 9 star missions corresponded to ultimate sword saints, especially the 9 star missions. Only the idealistic sword saint and infinite sword saint had completed them. The mission tower had a total of 9 floors. The first floor corresponded to 1 star missions, the second floor corresponded to 2 star missions, and so on. The reward for 1 star missions wasn't very generous. The highest reward was 1,000, although it could be accumulated. As long as one completed a lot of 1 star missions, one could still get a lot of contribution points. Yichen didn't want to go through so much trouble. The highest reward for 2 star missions was 5,000. The highest reward for 3 star missions was 30,000. The highest reward for 4 star missions was 200,000. However, it was too difficult. Only sword saints who had condensed God power could complete it. Capture spiritual clouds. 10,000 contribution points for each one you capture. Yichen had found a pretty good 3 star mission, which could be done repeatedly. Capturing 1 beam of spirit mist would complete the mission. The more you captured, the more contribution points you would get. A lot of sword saints were taking on this mission. This is it. Yichen accepted the mission. Spiritual clouds were a special kind of essence energy in the celestial realm. They were abundant in the spiritual cloud mountain range. Spiritual clouds could be used to refine sage artifacts, set up magic arrays, or fused with God power to increase the might of God power. The one who issued this mission was not an ordinary sword saint. It was one of the ultimate sword saints, the spiritual cloud sword saint. I'm afraid only an ultimate sword saint would be so rich. The reward for 1 spiritual cloud wasn't much, but 1,000 or 10,000 was a lot. Ordinary sword saints couldn't afford such a high reward. The spiritual cloud mountain range wasn't close to the sword god palace. There was no god's teleportation array between them, so one could only fly slowly. 10 years later, Yichen arrived at the spiritual cloud mountain range. The majestic spiritual cloud mountain range was like a divine mountain range. It was unfathomably deep and unfathomably tall. Everywhere was filled with spiritual light. It was clearly a blessed land of the celestial realm. Swish! After entering the spiritual cloud mountain range, Yichen suddenly discovered a ray of light chasing after an intermediate sword saint. This ray of light was as sharp as a sword. It was the spiritual cloud. Without much hesitation, Yichen's figure flashed. When he approached the spiritual cloud, he made a grabbing motion with his hand. The power of the 5 elements permeated out and enveloped the spiritual cloud. The spiritual cloud was still struggling and rampaging, causing Yichen's blood to boil. He was inwardly shocked. No wonder it's a 3-star mission. If I hadn't comprehended the 5 elements, and could use the power of the 5 elements, I wouldn't have been able to capture the spiritual cloud so easily. Capturing spiritual clouds wasn't like fighting. Divine skills were useless. One could only rely on one's own strength. Chapter 1469. My name is Radiant Star. May I know your name? Seeing that the light cloud was captured, the mid-grade sword saint's silhouette flickered as he flew over. My name is Green Lotus. Yichen replied. Green Lotus sword saint. I wonder if you could return the light cloud to me? The Radiant Star sword saint felt somewhat depressed. Earlier, although he was being chased by the light cloud, the actual situation wasn't like that. The light cloud could only be captured, it couldn't be forcefully attacked. Otherwise, it would reach the limit of the light cloud's endurance and shatter. Hence, the Radiant Star Sword Saint had no way to display his strength, and could only rely on his physical strength to capture the light cloud. Evidently, Yichen hadn't heard of this before, and was somewhat startled. The tone of the Radiant Star Sword Saint wasn't rude and unreasonable. Yichen didn't feel that the Radiant Star Sword Saint was being unreasonable. Seeing that Yichen didn't seem to know anything, the Radiant Star Sword Saint told Yichen about the light cloud. So that's the case. I was too rash. Yichen returned the light cloud to the Radiant Star Sword Saint. The radiant star sword saint had an embarrassed expression on his face. Speaking of which, I was the one who benefited. If not, I would need at least 10 days to capture this light cloud. Unwilling to take advantage of Yi Chen, the radiant star sword saint shared his experience with Yi Chen. Usually when the air is agitated, it means that there's a light cloud nearby. Remember, don't go to the depths of the valley. Although there are many light clouds there, there's a high possibility of being surrounded and attacked by many. When the number of light clouds reaches a certain level, a light cloud beast will be formed. The strength of the light cloud beast is extremely terrifying. Even the elementary divine technique I comprehended from the 420th divine inscription diagram was unable to injure it. And even if you could injure it, it would only cause it to dissipate. Hearing the radiant star sword saint's explanation, Yi Chen nodded his head repeatedly. These are my experiences. You should be careful. Many thanks for the information. These experiences were extremely useful to Yi Chen. After chatting for a while, the two of them separated. The first one he caught was 5 years later. Although there were a lot of spirit clouds in the Spirit Cloud Mountain, it was way too huge, and the spirit clouds were hidden too deep. It would not come out easily. This was the second spirit cloud that Yi Chen had seen in 5 years. 10,000. Yi Chen wasn't anxious at all. He was already prepared to stay here for a long time. The second one was 20 years later, the third 35 years later, and the fourth 52 years later. After 100 years, Yi Chen had captured 7 spirit clouds. Although it didn't seem like much, the efficiency was actually quite high. Many times, discovering the spirit clouds didn't mean that one could capture them. If it were any other sword saint, being able to capture 1 spirit cloud in 100 years would already be a great achievement. Most importantly, without comprehending complementary laws, sword saints couldn't carry too many spirit clouds. Yi Chen had the 5-element space, which could store spirit clouds, but other sword saints didn't. Therefore, every time they captured a spirit cloud, they would have to return, which would take 20 years. In the blink of an eye, Yi Chen had stayed in the Spirit Cloud Mountain range for 5,000 years. In these 5,000 years, Yi Chen had obtained 300 light clouds, which was 3 million contribution points. To Yi Chen, this was definitely a windfall. Of course, to sword saints who had condensed divine power, this was probably just a small fortune. Every level had their own values. For an ultimate sword saint, 100 or 2 million wasn't much at all. No one would be so bored as to come here to capture the spiritual clouds. If they had the time, they could do more meaningful things. The 5-element space can't take it anymore. Originally, Yi Chen wanted to stay for a while longer and gather 1,000 beams of spirit clouds. However, the 5-element space had its limit. Although 300 beams of spirit clouds seemed to be a lot gentler after being captured, they still possessed a powerful destructive power. The inside of Yi Chen's 5-element space was now full of holes. After returning to Sword God Palace, Yi Chen went to the mission tower and chose to submit the mission. I've already transferred 3 million contribution points to you. The mission tower also had a puppet sword saint. They were all sentient and were in charge of a large amount of contribution points. These contribution points were all transferred over by the person who issued the mission. Those who completed the mission would be able to obtain a corresponding amount of contribution points from the puppet sword saint. Evidently, the cloudy spirit sword saint had transferred a large amount of contribution points to the puppet sword saint. In front of Yi Chen, there were many people submitting this mission. The mission tower had a special storage space. After a period of time, the cloudy spirit sword saint would come over to collect the light clouds. Not being able to see the cloudy spirit sword saint, Yi Chen felt a little regretful. The ultimate sword saint was extremely elusive. Yi Chen had only seen the Snowheart sword saint and the limitless sword saint. Although the ultimate sword saint would be on the Swordheart Island, the distance was too far, and it was basically impossible to see him. Everyone could only see the word sword. The reason why he was able to see the limitless sword saint was because the limitless sword saint just so happened to pass by the vicinity of Yi Chen. 3 million contribution points. In addition to my own contribution points, I have a total of 3,600,000 contribution points. I should be able to exchange for the 6th to 9th beginner stage divine inscription diagrams. However, there's no rush for now. He wasn't in a hurry to exchange for it, nor was he in a hurry to comprehend the divine arts. Yi Chen decided to first earn enough contribution points before doing anything else. The second time, Yi Chen spent 5,500 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. The third time, Yi Chen spent 4,800 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. The 10th time, Yi Chen spent 5,200 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. After 10 times, Yi Chen earned a total of 30 million contribution points. And after 50,000 years, Yi Chen even took some time to go to the Sword Heart Island to look at the word sword. In any case, he didn't spend too much time looking at the word sword. Coincidentally, after submitting the mission for the 10th time, the Cloudy Spirit Sword Saint's mission was cancelled. It should be because the amount of light clouds was sufficient. After exchanging for the 6th to 10th beginner stage divine inscription diagrams, Yi Chen started his closed-door meditation. 200,000 years passed in a flash. Yi Chen had comprehended 5 different divine arts. The divine art he comprehended from the 10th beginner stage divine inscription diagram was Blade Heart. As the 10th divine art, the might of Blade Heart was much stronger than the 5th divine art, Floating Blood. However, it was still insufficient to help Yi Chen pass the 15th level of the Sword God Pagoda. After some consideration, Yi Chen exchanged for the 100th beginner stage divine inscription diagram. 120,000 years passed. On the Green Lotus Island, Chi, 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 Chi. In the sky above the vast and empty island, the void seemed to have split apart. The sky was filled with cross-shaped cracks, and within the cross-shaped cracks, a strange luster flowed like blood and ink. 100th divine art soul severing. So powerful, these 10 million contribution points were not spent in vain. The higher the level of the divine inscription diagrams, the more terrifying the divine arts would be. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint's strength was much weaker than Yi Chen's, but by relying on the 350th divine art, Sword Qi Danxia, he forcibly passed the 17th level of the Sword God Pagoda. From this, one could very well imagine how great the increase in strength of a divine art was. After I completely perfect soul severing, I can challenge the Sword God Pagoda again. Comprehension and perfection were two different things. In these hundreds of thousands of years, Yi Chen had already perfected the first 10 divine arts. He believed that perfecting soul severing wouldn't take too long. He went from the 14th floor to the 16th floor, and obtained close to 5 million contribution points. In this way, Yi Chen's current contribution points were still more than 21 million. My Soul Slayer has already been perfected. It's about time for me to exchange for an even better elementary level Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram. No matter who it was, there was no limit to the pursuit of godly skills. Yi Chen was no exception. After spending 20 million contribution points, Yi Chen exchanged for the 200th beginner level Sword Doctrine Divine Pattern. This Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram had a cluster of stamens drawn on it. The brushwork was still that extremely simple style. With just a few light strokes, it was extremely lifelike and contained boundless profundities. In the center of the heaven realm, there was a plane that was as old as the heaven realm. The plane was boundless and had no beginning or end. Here it was always in a state of dusk. Even the main god's sun and true god's stars couldn't shine on this place. There was an extremely ominous aura in this place. The twilight plane was one of the most dangerous places in the heaven realm since ancient times. Other than the law of primal chaos, there was also the law of dusk that covered the twilight plane. The law of dusk was the absolute law of all things. Anyone who stayed here for a long time would be on the decline. True gods were no exception. However, the twilight plane had always been a lively place. Every time a god war broke out, the twilight plane would definitely be one of the main battlefields. Many true gods had fallen here, and the number of demigods that had fallen here was as many as the stars in the sky. The number of demigods that had fallen here was countless times more than the number of demigods that were still alive in the heaven realm. Because true gods had fallen here, the Twilight Plane was also an important source of god stones. The flesh and blood of true gods mixed with the soil of the Twilight Plane would form god stone mines, or god stone pits. Of course, with the passage of time, the exposed god stone mines and god stone pits were long gone. The remaining god stone mines and god stone pits were all hidden under the Twilight Plane. It wasn't an easy task to find them. Other than god stone mines and god stone pits, the Twilight Plane was also a place where demigods fought each other. Every true god force had a god's transfer array that led to the Twilight Plane. In the Twilight Plane, killing a demigod from the Divine Alliance could earn a certain amount of contribution points. For example, killing a primary battle saint and obtaining their token would earn 1 million contribution points. Killing an intermediate battle saint would earn 10 million contribution points. Killing an advanced battle saint would earn 1 billion contribution points. Killing an ultimate battle saint would earn 100 billion contribution points. This was only for demigods from ordinary true god forces. Demigods from main god forces were worth even more. Killing a primary battle saint from a main god's force would give him 10 million contribution points. Killing an intermediate battle saint from a main god's force would give him 100 million contribution points. Killing an advanced battle saint from a main god's force would give him 10 billion contribution points. Killing an ultimate battle saint from a main god's force would give him 1 trillion contribution points. That's right, a direct increase of 10 times. Demigods from main god forces were too monstrous and too difficult to kill. To the sword sages of the Sword God Palace, the contribution points obtained from clearing the Sword God Pagoda could only be obtained once and couldn't be repeated. If they wanted to obtain more contribution points, they had to clear the higher floors, complete missions, or come to the Twilight Plane. Compared to completing missions, killing demigods from the Divine Alliance was much faster. However, the prerequisite was that one had to be strong enough. This was the first time Yi Chen came to the Twilight Plane. Accompanying him were the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage and the Radiant Star Sword Sage. The Radiant Star Sword Sage was even stronger than the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage. He had comprehended the 420th divine skill, Vast Star Transformation. So this is the Twilight Plane? It had been 150,000 years since Yi Chen comprehended the 200th primary, Sword Dao Divine Pattern. Yi Chen had successfully comprehended the 200th divine skill, Sword Flower in Full Bloom. With the help of Sword Flower in Full Bloom, Yi Chen had passed the 17th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. His strength was now at the same level as the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage and the Radiant Star Sword Sage. Sensing that their strength was increasing slowly, and the difficulty of earning contribution points had increased, the three of them decided to venture into the Twilight Plane. With the three of them working together, it was still possible for them to kill an intermediate battle saint. When the time came, they would split the contribution points evenly and each of them would obtain more than 3 million contribution points. If they could kill a few more battle saints, this trip would not be in vain. Of course, searching for divine stones was also one of their goals. Be careful. Other than enemy demigods, there are also Twilight evil spirits in the Twilight Plane. This wasn't the first time the Radiant Star Sword Sage had come to the Twilight Plane. He couldn't help but remind Yi Chen and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage. I have never seen a Twilight evil spirit before. I heard that it is very difficult to deal with. It is formed by the resentment of the Twilight Plane. Chapter 1471. Dusk evil spirits are very frightening. The weakest dusk evil spirit is stronger than us, and the strongest dusk evil spirits are even feared by ultimate battle saints. Dusk evil spirits come in all shapes and sizes, and each form has a different fighting style. You have to be careful of those incomparably huge dusk evil spirits. Usually, these dusk evil spirits have a wide attack range, and you won't be able to escape even if you want to. The Radiant Star Sword Saint told them everything he knew. Don't worry, we can always escape if we can't beat them. Unless we are unlucky and encounter a gigantic dusk evil spirit. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint smiled. Flying above the dusk plane, Yi Chen's group was very cautious. There were more dusk evil spirits in the dusk plane than they had imagined. After a month, they had already encountered more than a dozen. The dusk evil spirits came in all shapes and sizes. Some looked like trees, and only when they attacked would they be noticed. Some looked like centipedes, burrowing out from the ground. Some were flat, and spread on the ground like a large lawn. There were also dusk evil spirits that floated in the sky. They were transparent and difficult to scan with soul power. A few days ago, the three were almost surrounded by a dusk evil spirit in the form of a lawn. With the strength of the dusk evil spirits, and the frightening power of the dusk law, they were not far from death. The dusk plane is much more dangerous than I imagined. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint sighed. The Radiant Star Sword Saint said, "Get used to it. As long as we are careful, there won't be any accidents." "And be careful." Yi-Chen nodded. Although the dusk evil spirits were hard to guard against, they were not very fast. Another month passed in a flash, and the three found a prey. According to the aura of the token, they could determine that the opponent was a demigod of the Dark Alliance. The one who discovered this demigod was Yi-Chen. The Netherworld Sacred Eye allowed him to lock onto the opponent from far away, and the opponent was completely unaware. Just in case, the three flanked from three directions. Kill. Yi-Chen attacked first. A soul slash was unleashed, and the void cracked, emitting a pitch-black light. A powerful suction force locked onto the opponent. This was a demigod with blood-red tentacles on his head. His eyes were like light bulbs, and he was extremely frightening. However, he was panicking at this moment. Yi-Chen's attack was much stronger than his. Even though they were both demigods, there were still differences. Puff. His body exploded, and this demigod turned into a streak of bloody light that shot out, escaping from Soul Slayer's range. This was the blood escape technique of the Law of Blood. Sword Chi Red Glow. The Dan Cloud Sword Saint stopped him. His red sword chi was like clouds in the sky, covering the blood light. Needless to say, it was not easy to kill a mid-level demigod who had comprehended the precepts. After all, this was not the Chaos Battlefield. The mid-level demigods in the Chaos Battlefield did not comprehend the precepts. In the Heaven Realm, although most of the mid-level demigods did not comprehend the precepts, there were still quite a few who had comprehended the precepts. This was especially so for the forces of the main gods. Every member of the forces had comprehended the precepts and had cultivated for countless years. After breaking through the sword chi, the blood-red light shot in another direction. Star's transformation. The Radiant Star Sword Sage's attack had arrived. The Radiant Star Sword Saint's attacks were even more powerful than the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint's and Yi-Chen's attacks. As soon as he used his 420th skill, the sword chi filled the sky, as if countless stars were blinking. Pu. The bloody light was riddled with holes, and was forced to reveal itself. Sword flower blooming. Sword chi red glow. Yi-Chen and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint, who had rushed over, released their divine skills together and attacked. Not bad, we killed one. The three of them were very happy to have killed a mid-level battle saint. After all, this was 10 million contribution points. Compared to challenging the Sword God Pagoda, killing a hostile demigod from the Divine Alliance was much easier, and more contribution points could be obtained. Of course, it was also very dangerous. It was very possible that you would become someone else's prey. The danger came so suddenly. After the three of them killed 3 mid-level battle saints, they suddenly encountered an advanced battle saint. Moreover, it was an advanced battle saint from a main god's force. Advanced battle saints from main god's force had almost 100% condensed godly power and comprehended the precepts. Haha die. Battle Saint Rider was an advanced battle saint from the God of Destruction Palace. His strength was not considered outstanding among the advanced battle saints of the God of Destruction Palace. He was just an ordinary member, but he was more than enough to deal with 3 mid-level sword saints. The giant scimitar slashed out, and the plane below the three of them instantly cracked. It was as if a demon had opened its mouth. Pooh. The Radiant Star Sword Saint comprehended the Starlight precepts. His starlight form was merely grazed by the blade energy, and the starlight immediately dissipated. He was seriously injured, and more than 10% of his martial yuan shen was obliterated. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint comprehended the fire and water precepts. Even though he was using the fire travel technique, his fire travel technique was also destroyed by the blade energy. He was also seriously injured and fell to the ground, creating a large hole in the plane. Yi Chen was even more unlucky. Battle Saint Rider had focused his attack on him, so the blade energy directly hit him. Fortunately, Yi Chen used the 5 elemental fire escape technique. With the protection of the 5 elemental precepts, this blade energy obliterated less than 10% of his martial yuan shen. The injury he suffered was similar to that of the Radiant Star Sword Saint and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint. Is this the strength of a powerful demigod? To be honest, this was the first time Yi Chen saw the true strength of a powerful demigod. Although the Sweet Dew Sword Saint and the Shadowless Sword Saint had shown some of their strength, they had not really fought with Yi Chen. On the Chaos battlefield, although the level 9 Chaos creatures were comparable to powerful demigods, they were not good at using the precepts. You are indeed different after comprehending the complementary precepts. Battle Saint Rider grinned. An ordinary intermediate Battle Saint would definitely not be able to block a single blade attack from him. Only those who comprehended the complementary precepts would be able to become ultimate Battle Saints in the end. If that's the case, then I won't be able to tolerate you. Battle Saint Rider's killing intent intensified. Fierce Tiger Slash. With a slash, the blade energy transformed into a ferocious tiger that pounced towards Yi Chen's group. This was not an ordinary blade art, but a divine skill. He did not even use his full strength in the first slash. Too powerful. The Radiant Star Sword Saint and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint were about to lose all hope. Tears of ice and snow. Suddenly, a teardrop flew over from afar and froze the ferocious tiger blade energy. Then it pierced through Battle Saint Rider's forehead. Crack, crack, crack. Battle Saint Rider's entire body turned into an ice sculpture and shattered. His martial yuan shen immediately collapsed. This meant that the power of the attack had far exceeded the limits of his martial yuan shen. It's Sword Saint Snowheart. Yi Chen turned his head to look. Beside the silver-haired Sword Saint Snowheart were other high-level Sword Saints, as well as some Battle Saints that Yi Chen did not recognize. Without exception, these people were all high-level demigods who had condensed godly power and comprehended the precepts. This meant that none of them were weaker than Battle Saint Rider, at least not by much. It's dangerous here. There will be a hunting operation soon. Retreat to the back and do not approach this place. Sword Saint Snowheart said calmly. Thank you, Sword Saint Snowheart, for saving us. Let's go. Radiant Star Sword Saint and Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint cupped their fists and hurriedly left. Yi Chen also thanked them and followed behind. Chapter 1472. The Twilight Plane was too dangerous for Yi Chen and the other two. The three of them decided that they would never come back to the Twilight Plane before they condensed their divine power. Time passed quickly. It had been 2 million years since Yi Chen came to the Heaven Realm. Duguju and the others had mostly come to the Heaven Realm. Those who didn't had either died of old age, died in battle, or died in the chaotic battlefield. During this time, Morong Qingqing and Su Jing had both become beginner demigods. From now on, their lifespans exceeded 100 million years. During this time, Yi Chen had comprehended the 300th and 400th beginner divine skill. His strength had increased to the next level, and he had passed the 18th floor of the Sword God Tower. However, the one who improved the most was the Radiant Star Sword Saint. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Radiant Star Sword Saint had condensed the Sword of Soul. He had been refining his divine power for the past tens of thousands of years. The last time he came out, he had actually reached the 25th floor of the Sword God Tower. One should know that the higher one went, the more difficult it would be. From now on, the Radiant Star Sword Saint is no longer on the same level as us. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint sighed. Yes. Yi Chen nodded. Almost all the battle sages of Overgod forces had comprehended the laws. Therefore, whether or not they condensed their divine power was the dividing line between the strong and the weak. Without condensing their divine power, It didn't matter if they were beginner battle sages or advanced battle sages, they were all weak. Once they condensed their divine power, even if they were beginner battle sages, they were still strong. Before condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint was only a bit stronger than them. But after condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint would only need a light sword strike to kill them. Yi Chen estimated that the current Radiant Star Sword Saint was a lot stronger than Battle Saint Ride. After all, Radiant Star Sword Saint had comprehended Starlight Law, which was a powerful law second only to peak laws. We need to work hard too. We need to condense the Sword of Soul and refine our divine power as soon as possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint clenched his fist. Those who had comprehended the laws of nature and were able to refine divine energy were powerful demigods. Among overgod forces, the majority of high-rank battle saints were powerful demigods. The majority of high-rank sword saints in Sword God Palace were also powerful demigods. Intermediate-rank battle saints and sword saints were much rarer. Only 1 out of 10 could become a powerful demigod. Normally, only the elites could refine divine energy at the intermediate rank and become a powerful demigod. As for Ultimate Battle Sage, that was an even higher level, so he couldn't think about it for now. I will. Yi Chen felt that he had already touched the threshold of the Sword of the Soul and was only 1 step away. As usual, Yi Chen would head to Sword Heart Island to look at the word after the power of the word dissipated. Yi Chen had been in the Heaven Realm for 1,500,000 years. Haha. The Radiant Star Sword Sage arrived at Green Lotus Island, laughing heartily. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint were there, drinking and chatting. Bright Star Sword Saint, have you already converted all of your power into godly power? Yi Chen asked. Bright Star Sword Saint picked up a cup of wine and gulped it down. Not bad. After spending several 100,000 years, I've finally converted all of my power into godly power. Godly power was the fusion of all of one's power, which was why it was so powerful. Congratulations. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint hurriedly toasted Bright Star Sword Saint. Although he wasn't on the same level as Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint, Bright Star Sword Saint didn't put on airs and said, "You guys have to work hard too. Once you condense the Sword of the Soul, you'll be able to comprehend divine skills very quickly, and your comprehension of laws will also increase very quickly. Without reaching this level, you won't know how wonderful it is. We've known this for a long time. Unfortunately, condensing the Sword of the Soul isn't that easy." Dan Yun Sword Saint smiled bitterly. I'm preparing to go to the Twilight Plane again to see if I can get some divine stones to upgrade my Sky Saint artifact. It's a pity that I can't go with you guys. Bright Star Sword Saint was very confident in his own strength. At his level, unless it was an ultimate battle sage, even if his opponent was stronger than him, it would still be very difficult to kill him. Be careful. Yes, don't be careless. Don't worry. I won't be so unlucky as to meet an enemy ultimate battle sage. Sword Heart Island. Yi Chen didn't know how many times he had come to Sword Heart Island. Sometimes he went alone, and sometimes he came with Dan Yun Sword Saint. As he observed the word, time passed by bit. Sword Heart Island contained the powerful power of the word. Time obviously slowed down a lot. 100 years inside was longer than 10,000 years outside. Unknowingly, Yi Chen's body started to emit a faint heart force. Although this heart force was faint and faintly discernible, it was extremely sharp. Immediately after, the word in Yi Chen's eyes started to change. First, he practiced countless divine-level sword arts. In the blink of an eye, more than 1,000 primary divine-level sword arts were all practiced. The speed was so fast that it made people's hair stand on end. Yi Chen couldn't react at all. His sea of soul was surging. In another blink of an eye, more than 50 intermediate divine-level sword arts were also practiced, followed by 3 advanced divine-level sword arts. After 3 blinks of an eye, the word sword turned into a figure that was sitting cross-legged. This figure was blurry, but the power it gave off caused the world to fall silent. Yi Chen had a feeling that this was the image of the sword god. Soul Sword. Someone has created a soul sword. Sword Heart Island became lively. Many sword saints looked at the place where the heart force waves were extremely intense. There, an illusory divine sword was being born. In the center of the illusory divine sword was a human figure. Is this the spirit sword? At this moment, Yi Chun was in a mysterious realm. He felt that he was omnipotent, and that there was nothing that could stump him. He felt that he was incomparably strong. This strength was not external, but internal. Apart from that, his extremely powerful heart allowed him to have absolute control over his various powers. This was probably the key to refining divine power and becoming a powerful demigod. I've finally come to this step. Yi Chun was filled with anticipation. After the Radiant Star Sword Saint refined his divine power, his strength would become unbelievably strong. Yi Chun himself had comprehended the complementary laws of nature and the 5 elements. He wondered how strong he would become after he refined his divine power. Other than that, Yi Chun was more concerned about the fact that he had 3 supreme sword intents. Could it be that the 3 supreme sword intents would all be integrated into his divine power? Divine power was the fusion of all powers, and sword intents were included. There's no rush. Yi Chun was familiarizing himself with the spirit sword. My spirit sword is blue in color. Gradually, the realm of the spirit sword stabilized, and Yi Chun discovered that his spirit sword was blue in color. The spirit sword was also the light of the soul. On the surface, the light of the soul referred to the light emitted from one's heart. Since it was the light emitted from one's heart, it would naturally have a color. The color varied from person to person. For people with a dark heart, the light of the soul would also be dark. For people with a bright heart, the light of the soul would also be bright. It reflected the nature of a person's heart. Yi Chun's spirit sword was blue in color. This color was on the cold side but very pure. It was in line with Yi Chun's nature. He was cold but very righteous. Chapter 1473. After leaving Sword Heart Island, Yi Chun immediately went into seclusion. He needed time to refine divine power. This was a huge project. Under the control of the Sword of Spirit, Yi Chun gathered all the power in his body to his heart. The heart was the center of divine power, and also the place where divine power was produced. After all, the Sword of Spirit was also born from the heart. It was as if all the streams had returned to the origin. All the power gathered. First was the inextinguishable power of the spirit body, followed by the sword energy and chi, then the sword domain and sword intent. Apart from the laws, all of Yi Chun's power gathered at his heart. The whole heart gave off a colorful light, jumping and vibrating. Fortunately, it was protected by the Sword of Spirit, so it wouldn't explode. Fuse. The existence of the Sword of Spirit allowed Yi Chun to control so many powers with ease. Taking a deep breath, Yi Chun started to fuse the powers and refine divine power. Strand by strand, refining divine power was very slow. If Yi Chun's original power was the vast ocean, then the process of refining divine power was like drawing seawater into a river. The river seemed wide, but compared to the ocean, it was not worth mentioning. No wonder the Radiant Star Sword Saint had spent hundreds of thousands of years to convert all the power in his body into divine power. However, what excited Yi Chun was that the 3 supreme sword intents were all fused and converted into divine power. This meant that Yi Chun's divine power had 2 more types of power than others. Let's see how powerful the divine power is. 100 years later, the divine power in Yi Chun's body began to take shape. It was a blue power, very vast and pure. He flicked his finger, and a blue finger force flew out. Boom! Terrifying ripples appeared in the sky. Time and space were distorted. The entire Sword God Palace was enveloped by a formless power. Green Lotus Island was the same. In the past, when Yi Chun used his full power, he couldn't even cause the formless power to move. Now with a flick of his finger he had such power. One could imagine how big the difference was. Amazing. Just the divine power alone is already stronger than my previous attack. If I use the divine skill, Yi Chun couldn't estimate his own power anymore. He had to challenge the Sword God Pagoda to find out. Green Lotus Sword Saint, you've already condensed the Sword of Spirit? One day, Sword Saint Dan Yun came to Green Lotus Island. He had just returned from his mission and learned that Yi Chun had condensed the Sword of Soul, so he immediately rushed over. Not bad. Yi Chen nodded and called Sword Saint Dan Yun over. Congratulations. I wonder when I will be able to reach this step. Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint was incomparably envious. He had become a mid-grade Sword Saint a step earlier than Yi Chen, but he didn't expect Yi Chen to surpass him. I was lucky. Condensing the Sword of Spirit was not something that one could control. When the time was right, it was naturally done. From now on, you are also a powerhouse, and you are even stronger than the Radiant Star Sword Saint. I don't think anyone below the Ultimate Battle Saint level can kill you. Sword Saint Dan Yun knew Yi Chen very well. Not only did Yi Chen comprehend the complementary laws of 5 elements, but he also had the 3 supreme sword intents. His foundation was much better than the Radiant Star Sword Saints. Excluding the Ultimate Battle Saints, if the Radiant Star Sword Saint was considered ordinary, then Yi Chen was definitely in the upper tier. Although he wasn't at the peak, at least the peak wouldn't be able to kill him easily. Another 100,000 years passed. Yi Chen had already transformed 1/3 of his divine power. The divine power in his body was surging like the sea. Just like what the Radiant Star Sword Saint had said, after condensing the Sword of Spirit, the speed at which one's law level increased was at least 100 times faster. In 100,000 years, the speed at which one's law level increased was much faster than before. Sword God Pagoda. Yi Chen started from the 19th floor, the 20th floor, the 21st floor, the 22nd floor, the 23rd floor, the 24th floor. Yi Chen effortlessly passed the 24th floor. This floor was the level of the Radiant Star Sword Saint. The 25th floor, the 26th floor, the 27th floor. When he reached the 28th floor, Yi Chen finally stopped. The 32nd floor and above is the level of the Ultimate Sword Saint. I'm still 5 floors away from the Ultimate Sword Saint. These 5 floors were not to be underestimated. Every floor was extremely difficult to pass. The reason why Ultimate Battle Saints were called Ultimate Battle Saints was because not only did they complement each other, but their divine power was also quite perfect. However, Yi Chen's divine power was not perfect. His sword origin, sword domain, and sword intent were all not perfect. Thus, the divine power formed from their fusion was naturally not perfect. Reaching the 28th floor, which was the same as passing the 27th floor, rewarded quite a lot of contribution points. Passing the 19th floor rewarded 26 million contribution points. Passing the 20th floor rewarded 52 million contribution points. Passing the 21st floor, 100 million. Passing the 22nd floor, 200 million. Passing the 23rd floor, 400 million. Passing the 24th floor, 800 million. Passing the 25th floor 6 billion. Passing the 26th floor 2 billion. Passing the 27th floor 4 billion. A total of 8 billion contribution points. Another 400,000 years passed. Yi Chen had been in the heaven realm for 2 million years. Yi Chen had already converted all his power into divine power, and comprehended the 500th primary godly skill, Shattering Heart Sword. In 5 million years, Yi Chen comprehended the 600th and 700th primary godly skill. In the 300th year, he comprehended the 800th primary godly skill. It's getting hard. Yi Chen faintly felt that it was getting harder to comprehend primary godly skills. The higher the level, the harder it was to comprehend. Although his comprehension ability had increased a lot after condensing the Sword of Soul, sometimes, a high comprehension ability was not as useful as a deep foundation. For example, if Yi Chen was given a middle-level godly skill, Yi Chen would not be able to comprehend it. This required an incomparably deep foundation. Sword Saint Snowheart comprehended more than 200 primary godly skills, not because he had nothing better to do, but to build his own foundation. In 8 million years, Sword Saint Scarlet Cloud also condensed the Sword of Soul. The Radiant Star Sword Saint and Yi Chen's existence had more or less stimulated him. Now he had converted more than half of his divine power. He had even met up with Yi Chen some time ago, so he was in a very good mood. I have to slowly build my foundation. Good preparation is the key to success. The eruption of power exhausted Yi Chen's potential. Yi Chen did not expect to achieve much in just a few million years. Those ultimate sword saints had all spent tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions of years to cultivate and accumulate. If a primary demigod could live for more than 100 million years, a powerful demigod, who had condensed divine power, could be said to have eternal life. They could live for at least 10 billion years. They had enough time to accumulate. After challenging the Sword God Pagoda, Yi Chen successfully passed the 28th level and obtained 12.8 billion contribution points. He was only 4 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. Although the contribution points were a lot, he knew that it was still not enough to exchange for the beginner sword Dao pattern. It should be known that the 1000th beginner sword Dao pattern required 100 million contribution points, and exchanging for 1/5 of a beginner sword Dao pattern would require an astronomical amount of contribution points. Tens of billions of contribution points were nothing to him. Hence, Yi Chen decided to head to the Twilight Plains again to search for divine stones and hunt for battle sages of the Divine Union. Chapter 1474. Boom boom boom. On the Twilight Plain, the sound waves shook the sky and the ground cracked. Two figures kept clashing, exchanging thousands of blows in an instant. Every time they clashed, a chaotic light would appear. One of the black figures was a battle sage demon with 2 horns on his head. His aura was very similar to the first demon ancestor, as if they came from the same source. The blue figure was Yi Chen. You have the bloodline of the great demon ancestor? During the battle, Yi Chen still had the energy to speak. The demon sneered. That's right. In our demon god palace, everyone has the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Our bloodline is the noblest, and I, demon saint, come from the powerful demon river universe. It wasn't only the black-yellow universe that had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Many universes had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. I see. Yi Chen understood. In the black-yellow universe, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was indeed a very powerful bloodline. However, in the demon god palace of the heaven realm, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was only the most basic quality. If the first demon ancestor came to the heaven realm, he should have joined the demon god palace. This sky demon saint was very powerful. He was a high-level battle saint himself, and he had comprehended the darkness law and wind law. His realm was very high, much higher than even Sweet Dew Sword Saint. His divine power was even more frightening. His will and domain seemed to have reached perfection, transforming into divine power that was not inferior to Yi Chen's divine power. Most importantly, he had comprehended a mid-level divine skill. Fortunately, this mid-level divine skill was not perfected yet. Otherwise, Yi Chen would not be his opponent. The two fought for a day and a night, but there was still no winner. Demon Saint's advantage was that he had cultivated for a long time. Yi Chen's advantage was that he had comprehended the complementary 5 elements. Their advantages cancelled each other out. Demon Saint, I hope to see you again next time. Yi Chen did not want to fight anymore. After millions of years, he had accumulated a lot of power of the 5 elements. However, he did not want to waste it on a battle that he could not win. Don't go. Demon Saint chased after him. Unfortunately, Yi Chen's speed was much faster than his opponent. In a short while, he had left his opponent far behind. There were battles everywhere on the Twilight Plains. There were one-on-one fights, group fights, and even small-scale battles between gods. Everywhere was filled with the smoke of battle. 100,000 years had passed, and Yi Chen's battle achievements were bountiful. He had killed over 100 enemy intermediate battle saints and 7 advanced battle saints, earning over 10 billion contribution points. On this day, Yi Chen discovered a god's stone pit. The reason why he discovered it was because when he was fighting against an enemy advanced level battle saint, the aftermath of the battle had lifted up the ground and exposed the god's stone pit. With a burst of strength, Yi Chen killed his opponent and occupied the godstone pit for himself. 11,000 parangons. A smile appeared on Yi Chen's face. This trip to the Twilight Plains had been worth it. Not only had he obtained tens of billions of contribution points, but he had also obtained so many divine stones. Compared to the former, The latter was clearly more valuable. Before coming to the Twilight Plains, Yi Chen had exchanged for a total of 10,000 9-star Earth Saint swords. A single 9-star Earth Saint sword required more than 5,000 contribution points, so 10,000 swords were only around 50 million. This was nothing to the current Yi Chen. After choosing 1,000 9-star Earth Saint swords, Yi Chen began to fuse them with the parangons. The result was not bad. After spending around 9,000 parangons, Yi Chen obtained 15 3-star Heaven Saint swords. Originally, he had 3 swords, but now he had a total of 18 swords. After spending another 300 parangons, he obtained 3 more 4-star Heaven Saint swords. Now, with the addition of the Firmament sword, Yi Chen had 4 4-star Heaven Saint swords. He was left with around 2,000 parangons. Hopefully my luck will be better. Yi Chen took a deep breath and tried to fuse the parangons with the Firmament sword. Boom! The Firmament sword suddenly turned transparent, and an intense light burst forth. In the next moment, it exploded with a loud bang. The terrifying shockwave sent Yi Chen flying. Fortunately, Yi Chen's current strength was not the same as before. Under the protection of the divine force, he didn't suffer any injuries. What a pity! Yi Chen felt very regretful. The Firmament sword had accompanied him for millions of years, and his feelings for it were rather deep. Now it had exploded just like that, and not even a fragment could be found. Since even the Firmament sword was gone, Yi Chen didn't feel any pity for the 3 remaining 4-star Heaven Saint swords. He didn't hesitate to fuse the parangons with the parangons. Boom! The second 4-star Heaven Saint sword exploded. Then it was the third sword. It was unknown if the quality of this 4-star Heaven Saint sword was indeed very good, surpassing the Firmament sword. The moment the parangons fused with the parangons, the sword emitted an astonishing radiance. This radiance wasn't the intense light of an explosion, but an extremely dazzling radiance. The power of laws interweaved with each other, and it was extremely hair-raising. No wonder. It actually contains the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Yi Chen was very surprised. He didn't pay much attention to this sword before, but now that he looked deeper into it, he realized that the source of this sword contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It was rather perfect and formed a cycle. Yi Chen didn't know that demigods and Heaven Saint weapons were divided into different levels. Demigods who comprehended the complementary laws were elites among demigods. Heaven Saint weapons that contained the complementary laws were elite Heaven Saint weapons. I'll call you 5-element sword, since it contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It was much easier to give it a name. In for a penny, in for a pound. Yi Chen planned to upgrade the 5-element sword to the 6-star grade. With the quality of the 5-element sword, the success rate was very high. Yi Chen forcefully spat out a mouthful of turbid air and continued to fuse. The result made Yi Chen pleasantly surprised. The 5-element sword successfully upgraded to the 6-star grade. The process was rather smooth. What about the 7-star? Yi Chen felt that it was highly possible. A terrifying 5-colored light burst out, and the laws of the 5 elements intertwined. In Yi Chen's eyes, the 5-element sword suddenly rose to the 7-star grade. It was rather heavy in his hand, and it felt like he could split a primordial divine mountain in half. Break! With a low roar, Yi Chen slashed the ground in front of him. Kacha! A blue-colored sword light burst out, and a pitch-black hole appeared on the ground. The hole kept expanding and extended crazily, forming a small canyon. The hole that was closer to Yi Chen was narrow and deep, and the further away from Yi Chen, the shallower the hole was. However, the width of the hole had increased by 1,000 times. It should be comparable to an 8-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, or even a 9-star. Yi Chen's face revealed a joyful expression. Although the 5-element sword was a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, it contained the fragments of the laws of the 5 elements. When combined with the laws of the 5 elements that Yi Chen had, the power it could display was very terrifying. It definitely surpassed the 7-star Heaven Saint treasure. After all, Yi Chen was also someone who had seen a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword. He had even seen a 9-star Heaven Saint treasure sword before. There were many sword saints in the sword god palace, who had a 9-star heaven saint treasure sword. This is a pleasant surprise. After losing the firmament sword, and obtaining the 5-element sword, Yi Chen didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. It should be both. Yi Chen estimated that his strength had increased by a small level. If he encountered the Sky Demon Saint again, he might not be able to do anything to him, but he could at least suppress him. Chapter 1475. Time passed by quickly. In the 3,600,000th year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 50 elementary divine skills. In the 5 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 100 elementary divine skills. In the 5,500,000th year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1 millionth elementary divine skill. In the 6 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1,100,000th elementary divine skill. In the 8 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 150 elementary divine skills. In the 10 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 200 elementary divine skills. In the 111 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1172nd elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. This elementary divine skill was the last of the elementary divine skills, and it was also the most powerful one. Next, I can try to comprehend a mid-grade divine skill. Even the weakest mid-grade divine skill was still a mid-grade divine skill. Its power was not something a low-grade divine skill could compare to. After all these years, Yi Chen had already passed the 29th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 3 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword sage. If he could comprehend a mid-grade divine skill, he might be able to pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda, and his power would increase greatly. Of course, he was able to pass the 29th level, not only because he had comprehended the last elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. It was also because after countless years, Yi Chen's nomological realm had improved a lot. The 5-elemental nomological realm was already close to phenomenal success. Once it reached phenomenal success, he would only be a step away from perfection. Furthermore, as the 5-elemental nomological realm improved, Yi Chen discovered that the quality of the 5 elemental swords was also improving. The 5 elemental nomological fragments inside were gradually becoming stronger. As it turned out, Yi Chen often imbued the 5 elemental nomological laws into the 5 elemental swords, causing the 5 elemental swords to form a direct connection with Yi Chen. As Yi Chen's 5 elemental nomological realm improved, the quality of the 5 elemental swords would also improve. Sensing that the 5 elemental swords could be upgraded to the 8-star level, Yi Chen did not think too much and imbued 10 divine stones into it. In the end, the 5-element sword was successfully upgraded to 8 stars, and it was only 1 step away from becoming a 9-star Sky Saint artifact. In the 13 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 250 primary godly skills. At this point, in terms of the number of primary godly skills that he had comprehended, Yi Chen was not inferior to Sword Saint Snowheart. Of course, Sword Saint Snowheart did not comprehend primary godly skills in order. Sword Saint Snowheart had also comprehended many of the lower-ranked primary godly skills. In the 150 million years, Yi Chen finally comprehended his first intermediate divine skill. The first intermediate divine skill, Thousand Eyes. Green Lotus Island, the Radiant Star Sword Sage, the Pilcloud Sword Sage, the Sweet Dew Sword Sage, and the Shadowless Sword Sage had all arrived. They had already become good friends, often drinking, chatting, and sparring with each other. Green Lotus Sword Saint, I, the Shadowless Sword Saint, rarely admire people, but you are the one I admire. In just a short 10 million years, you have become the strongest amongst us, and even far surpassed us. I can't help but admire you. The Shadowless Sword Saint sighed with emotion. Hearing this, the Sweet Dew Sword Saint nodded. The Shadowless Sword Saint is right. There are 3 people in the Sword God Palace that I admire the most. One is the Idealistic Sword Saint, the second is the Peerless Sword Saint, and the third is you. In comparison, the Idealistic Sword Saint and the Peerless Sword Saint are unable to reach your level in 10 million years. Yi Chen's monstrous level was simply shocking. Comprehending divine skills was as easy as eating and drinking. Among intermediate sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 30 primary godly skills. Among advanced sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 100 primary godly skills. However, Yi Chen had comprehended nearly 300 primary godly skills. It was truly admirable. I think Green Lotus Sword Saint might be able to break the record of the Sword God Palace and become the ultimate sword saint in the shortest time possible. The Bright Star Sword Saint smiled. It's highly possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint nodded. Yi Chen smiled. Everyone, you're too kind. I merely put all my effort into it. There's nothing else. Yi Chen did not pretend to be modest. It was true that he rarely paid attention to things that were unrelated to him. His life was very simple, and that was to constantly work hard to become stronger. Although the four of them held him in high esteem, he himself was not very satisfied. This was because he did not pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda, even though he had comprehended the first intermediate godly skill, Thousand Eyes. The later levels of the Sword God Pagoda could be said to be abnormal. Passing each level was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It did not mean that one would be able to smoothly pass through the levels with just a little bit of improvement. One had to improve tremendously and have a qualitative breakthrough. In the 16th million year, Yi Chen's sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection. The divine power it transformed into was even stronger. It was no longer inferior to the divine power of an ultimate sword saint. After all, ultimate sword saints did not have 3 supreme sword intents. As the sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection, Yi Chen successfully passed through the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 2 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 17th million year, Yi Chen comprehended the 5th intermediate godly skill, Flourish. In the 20th million year, a godly battle erupted between the Sword God Deity Branch's Beast God and the Demonic God Deity Branch's Demonic Beast God. In the Myriad Beast battlefield, this was in planar battlefield jointly opened up by the Beast God and the Demonic Beast God. The battlefield was vast and boundless. At this moment, there were tens of millions of battle sages fighting on the battlefield. Tens of thousands of battle sages were dying every moment. A godly battle was extremely tragic. Under normal circumstances, after a long and drawn-out godly battle, more than half of the battle sages on both sides would die. Hence, unless it was absolutely necessary, a godly battle would not break out easily. Once it did, it would be a battle to the death. As a member of the Beast God Valley, Su Jing naturally had to participate in the battle. In the past 20 million years, she had also improved greatly. Unfortunately, in the Myriad Beast battlefield, she was still an ordinary member. She could be killed at any time. Yi Chen also participated in this godly battle. He had to participate. Otherwise, it was very likely that Su Jing would die on the battlefield. Puff, puff, puff. It was as if 1,000 eyes blinked in the sky. Dozens of demonic beast mountain battle sages were killed. This was the first intermediate godly skill, Thousand Eyes. The moment 1,000 eyes appeared, it was as if the Grim Reaper had opened 1,000 eyes. It's the Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace. Everyone, follow me to kill him. Yi Chen's strength attracted countless attacks. The Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace was very famous in the Heaven domain. In terms of combat strength, if the Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace claimed to be the second strongest, no one would dare to claim to be the first. Of course, this was under the condition that their foundations were similar. Otherwise, even Yi Chen would not be able to withstand an ultimate battle sage. Boom, boom, boom. At least 100 intermediate and advanced battle sages joined forces to attack Yi Chen. Flourish. The moment the 5 elements sword appeared, the void seemed to have become a kaleidoscope. Everything was twisted, folded, and shattered. Blood dyed the sky red. Over 100 enemy battle sages had died. Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace, die for me. Right at this time, a huge hammer smashed over from afar. This hammer was only a few meters long and was connected to a chain. However, when the hammer smashed over 1,000 battle sages of the Beast God Valley were smashed into meat paste. The might of this hammer was so great that it was terrifying to the extreme. Chapter 1476. Boom! A majestic wave of air came toward him, blowing Yi Chen's hair backward. The next moment, the hammer struck him like a meteor. With a clang, Yi Chen almost lost his grip on the five-element sword. His body froze there as if struck by lightning. A thousandth of a second later, he was sent flying backward, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Ultimate battle saints were too strong. If not for Yi Chen's divine power, which was not inferior to an ordinary ultimate battle saint, this hammer strike could have taken Yi Chen's life. Even so, Yi Chen clearly sensed that his martial yuan spirit was worn out. Although their divine powers were about the same, the opponent's comprehension of the laws was higher than Yi Chen's. It should be noted that the ultimate battle saint also comprehended the complementary laws. What? He only spat out a mouthful of blood. The nearby battle saints of Devil Beast Mountain were shocked. The giant hammer battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Devil Beast Mountain. Although he was just an ordinary ultimate battle saint, an ultimate battle saint was still an ultimate battle saint. His divine power and comprehension of the laws had reached perfection. No one below the ultimate battle saint could stand a chance against him. His divine power is clearly not at perfection. Why is it so powerful? The giant hammer battle saint was a little puzzled. He was sure that Yi Chen's divine power was definitely not at perfection. This could not be hidden from him. However, its power was quite terrifying, especially its destructive power, which even surpassed his own divine power at perfection. Humph! Let's see how many of my hammers you can block. The giant hammer battle saint swung his hammer at Yi Chen like a hot knife through butter. The hammer was like a meteor, and the hammer was like a divine mountain. It locked onto Yi Chen's figure from far away. It was extremely fierce. At this moment a cold star pierced through the air. Clang! The hammer flew backward, out of the giant hammer battle saint's control. Giant hammer battle saint, your opponent is me. A clear and cold voice was heard. Yi Chen looked back and saw the cold star battle saint. The cold star battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Beast God Valley. Count yourself lucky. The giant hammer battle saint glared at Yi Chen with a murderous look and clashed with the cold star battle saint. In the 22 million year, the War of the Gods continued. The Sword God Systems Barbarian God Stronghold and the Demon God Systems Yiksha God Systems Yiksha Cave also joined the War of Gods. In the 25 millionth year, the Giant Spiritual Gods Giant Spiritual Mountain and the Evil Gods Evil Spirit Palace also joined the War of Gods. The Sword God Divine Branch and the Demon God Divine Branch were at daggers drawn. Kill! 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 The battlefield had long since shifted from the Myriad Beast battlefield to the Sword Demon battlefield jointly opened by Sword God and Demon God. The Sword Fiend battlefield was a battlefield created by a sovereign, and not even the laws of primal chaos were able to invade it. 5 million years of battle had greatly benefited Yi Chen. Not only had he advanced from an intermediate sword saint to an advanced sword saint, but he had also managed to comprehend his 7th and 10th intermediate divine skills. Apart from this, his greatest gain was that his 5 elemental laws had reached the large success realm, and he was only a step away from perfection. The 5 elemental laws had reached the phenomenal stage, and the 5 elemental sword's quality had risen along with it. In the end, it had become a 9-star Heaven Saint artifact. At this point, unless it was a divine artifact, there was no other Heaven Saint artifact that was stronger than the 5 elemental sword. At most, it would be on par with it. In the meantime, Yi Chen had also gone back to attempt the Divine Sword Pagoda. His current result was the 31st level of the Divine Sword Pagoda, and he was only 1 level away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 30 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 10. In the 35 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 16. In the Sword Demon battlefield, smoke filled the air, and corpses piled up like mountains. Clang, clang, clang. In a depression in the Sword Demon battlefield, an ultimate battle saint from the Yiksha cave was suppressing Yi Chen. Every time they exchanged blows, Yi Chen would be sent flying thousands of meters away. In the 15 million years since the start of the War of the Gods, Yi Chun had faced ultimate battle saints many times. The most dangerous time was when he was almost killed by an ultimate battle saint from the evil spirit palace. This ultimate battle saint from the Wuxia cave was about as strong as the giant hammer battle saint. He was not very terrifying, but he was still an ultimate battle saint. As time passed, he would still be in great danger. This ultimate battle saint from the Wuxia cave was called Battle Saint Yi He. His weapon was a trident. Since he could not kill Yi Chun in a short period of time, he was extremely violent, and each of his attacks was more domineering than the last. After dozens of attacks, Yi Chun could not help but spit out a large mouthful of blood. His martial soul had dimmed a little. Back then, the giant hammer battle saint had made him spit out blood with a single attack. This time he was much better. Earth Tyrant Heavenly Star. Suddenly, Battle Saint Yi He shot into the sky. In the next moment, his body spun, and a terrifying rotational force enveloped Yi Chun. The ground around Yi Chun was swept up, forming a huge ball of earth. It was like a small star, and it wrapped around Yi Chun. This was Battle Saint Yi He's most powerful mid-grade divine technique. It was always effective against those weaker than him. Under this move, Yi Chun felt a strong sense of danger. It was as if countless tridents were stabbing at him from all directions. There was no way to block or dodge. Am I going to be heavily injured? Yi Chun frowned. His martial soul had been heavily injured, and it would take a long time to recover. Moreover, the divinity battle was in full swing, and he could not afford to rest. The strong sense of danger caused Yi Chun's many years of accumulation to erupt once more. In his soul sea, the three supreme sword souls vibrated wildly, resonating with each other. Buzz! Time seemed to slow down thousands of times. Yi Chun's eyes swirled with black, white and gold. Boom! With a slash of his sword, the ball of earth was split in half, and Yi Chun escaped. Battle Saint Yi He could not believe that his ultimate technique had been broken. It had to be known that this technique could only be broken by ultimate battle saints of the same level. This godly power? Sensing the change in Yi Chun's godly power, Battle Saint Yi He was bewildered. Yi Chun's godly power was too strong, even stronger than his own. How could he know that Yi Chun's three supreme sword souls had all broken through to the peak of the ninth order in this crisis? At this point, Yi Chun's godly power had surpassed that of an ordinary consummate divine force. Moreover, he had two more supreme sword intents than an ordinary consummate divine force. This completely negated Battle Saint Yi He's advantage of having a higher cultivation level. I don't believe it. Battle Saint Yi He once again charged at Yi Chun. Boom! The earth trembled, and a violent shockwave radiated in all directions. Battle Saint Yi He and Yi Chun were both sent flying. Both sides were evenly matched. Impossible. Battle Saint Yi He could not accept this reality, and he attacked Yi Chun again and again. Unfortunately, each time he failed. He could not do anything to Yi Chun. Yi Chun's current strength had already reached the level of an ordinary ultimate battle saint. Of course, Yi Chun estimated that he was still quite a bit weaker than an ordinary ultimate sword saint. This was because ultimate battle saints were formed from the light of the soul, while ultimate sword saints were formed from the sword of the soul. The latter was stronger and more offensive. The reason why Yi Chun was able to block out one attack from the giant hammer battle saint and dozens of attacks from the Yi He battle saint before was because he was a sword saint. Otherwise, if it were a battle saint with the same quality as him, they would not be able to block it out. The sword saints of the sword god's palace were invincible under the same conditions. One more step, and my godly power will be perfect. Perfect divine power had to meet these conditions. The cultivation of an advanced sword saint, the inextinguishable power of a perfect spirit body, perfect sword intent, perfect sword domain, and so on. In short, all kinds of power had to be perfect. And the perfect divine power of an ultimate sword saint was a level higher than that of an ultimate battle saint. In terms of godly power, Yi Chun's current godly power should be similar to that of an ordinary ultimate sword saint. Unfortunately, he was lacking in other aspects. Against an ordinary ultimate battle saint, however, Yi Chen could use his godly power to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Chapter 1477. It had been 40 million years since Yi Chen had arrived in the Heaven Realm, and it had been 20 million years since the God War had erupted. The conflict between the Sword God Divine System and the Demon God Divine System had erupted, and the Sword God Palace's Sword Saints and Demon God Palace's Battle Saints had joined the God War. The Sword Demon battlefield could no longer withstand the endless destruction and was banished to the Twilight Plane by the law of primal chaos. The Twilight Plains became the battleground for the Sword God Pantheon and the Demon God Pantheon. The battle saints of the other main god pantheons did not step into the Twilight Plains, as they did not want to get involved in the God War. That kind of situation was not something that a single force could contend against, unless an all-out God War broke out in the Heaven Realm. Kill them all. The Sword God Palace is invincible. The Demon God Palace is invincible. On the Twilight Plains, hundreds of millions of battle saints were engaged in a fierce battle. Among them, the Sword God's Palace and the Demon God's Palace had the fewest people, but their battle prowess was the strongest. This was especially true for the Sword God's Palace. They only had a few million sword saints, but wherever they went, they were like a hot knife through butter. This was especially true for the group of sword saints, led by the ultimate sword saint. They were like monsters rampaging and unstoppable. Battle sages were not made of steel. Even if they were made of steel, there would still be a day when they would rust and collapse. Therefore, after a long period of time, any battle sage had the right to apply for a chance to rest. Taking advantage of the time to rest, Yi Chen worked hard to comprehend the divine skills. As long as he could comprehend the divine skills, he would be able to refine them through killing and perfecting them. It would be faster and more direct than usual. Right now, Yi Chen had already comprehended 600 beginner-level god skills and 7 intermediate-level god skills. He was ranked in the middle of the ultimate sword saints, and was even better than Sword Saint Snowheart and other ultimate sword saints. Of course, in terms of strength, Yi Chen was still the weakest ultimate sword saint. Ultimate sword saints were simply too strong. Other than Yi Chen, even the most ordinary ultimate sword saint was equivalent to an intermediate ultimate battle saint from a true god faction. Ordinary ultimate battle sages like the Giant Hammer Battle Sage and the Nightwall Battle Sage were no match for an ordinary ultimate sword sage. The 8th mid-level godly skill. On this day, Yi Chen comprehended another mid-level godly skill, Sword Essence. This was the 21st mid-level godly skill. It was also the 8th intermediate godly skill that Yi Chen had comprehended. Twilight Plains. Yi Chen met up with the Sword Saint of Sword God Palace. Su Jing and Morong Qingqing were still in Beast God Valley, an ancient fragrant castle. They were beginner battle saints, so they had more time to rest and strengthen themselves. On the battlefield, beginner battle saints were just cannon fodder. There was not much difference if they were present or not, so their rest time was relatively more relaxed. Green Lotus Sword Saint. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint, the Shadowless Sword Saint, the Radiant Star Sword Saint, and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint approached. "How's the situation?" Yi Chen asked. The Shadowless Sword Saint frowned. "The situation isn't very optimistic. Although the Sword Saints of our Sword God Palace are unparalleled, the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace can't be underestimated, especially when they obtained a Bloodline Divine skill that allows them to combine their Battle Saints in pairs, up to 6. Furthermore, the Demon Celestial Palace has several times more members than us." Bloodline skill? Yi Chen looked ahead. On the vast plains, divine power and laws intertwined. Yi Chen easily found the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace. The Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace were Battle Saints of main god forces after all. Their strength was higher than Battle Saints of true god forces, second only to the Sword Saint of Sword God Palace. Because they both had the bloodline of Great Demon King, the aura of the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace was very similar. Yi Chen immediately saw 2 Battle Saints fusing into one, becoming a gigantic unfamiliar Battle Saint. "This is the Bloodline Divine skill." Yi Chen didn't understand. Sweet Dew Sword Saint explained. Not all battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace can fuse together. There seems to be some conditions that need to be met. Unfortunately, the God Wars happened too quickly. We didn't get any information about this, so we don't know what the key to the Bloodline Divine skill is. Plus, only Demon Celestial Palace can use the Bloodline Divine skill. Even if we know the secret, we probably can't do anything about it. Yes. Bright Star Sword Saint and Red Cloud Sword Saint nodded. This should be the work of the demon god. Yichin guessed in his heart. Demon Celestial Palace was different from other true god forces, or main god forces. The members of Demon Celestial Palace all had the bloodline of the Great Demon King. This was very ridiculous. If it was just an ordinary bloodline, then it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the Great Demon King bloodline was the pinnacle of bloodlines. No one knew how the demon god created this bloodline. Perhaps he discovered some secret in the primal chaos and created the Great Demon King bloodline. Now he even researched a bloodline divine skill based on the Great Demon King bloodline. In front of them, the sky was filled with multicolored light. It was like the rising sun, but also like the setting sun. This was godly power. The godly power that belonged to the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was one of the Sword God Palace's ultimate sword saints. She was very powerful and had already reached the 34th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. Her godly power was fused with countless spirit clouds and was called the Dawn Spirit Godly Power. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's opponent was a bloodline divine warrior formed by the fusion of one Demon Celestial Palace's ultimate battle saint and 5 Demon Celestial Palace's advanced battle saints. The bloodline divine warrior was extremely powerful and had a huge body. Even their heavenly saint weapons had fused together, turning into a giant mace that seemed to be formed from a living creature. The mace had a huge mouth that could spit out a terrifying tongue. Puff! In a moment of carelessness, the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's shoulder was pierced by the tongue in the mace's huge mouth. Her entire body was flung away and smashed into the bodies of 3 sword saints. These 3 advanced sword saints did not even have the chance to make a sound before they exploded on the spot. Haha! Come on! Who will fight me? The bloodline divine warrior swept the mace with a ferocious expression. He was invincible, and the sword saints in his path were all turned into meat paste. In the sky outside the twilight plain, the 7 suns were especially dazzling. When did that demon god create a bloodline divine skill based on the Great Demon King's bloodline? What a surprise! Above the sun of destruction, a voice quietly whispered. The faint tone contained the taste of destruction. I knew that demon god was not so simple. He must have discovered something amazing while roaming the primal chaos. I'm afraid that Sword God is going to lose this time. Sword God has traveled the universe unhindered. His origins are unknown. Perhaps he had already anticipated this situation. That's why he has not shown himself for countless years. He should be looking for an opportunity. On the Sun of Chaos, an old man with an ancient face sat cross-legged. Beside him were 2 children. Teacher, is Sword God going to lose? The child on the left mustered up his courage and asked. The old man neither shook his head nor nodded. Everything is destined. There is no need to speculate. Let's just keep watching. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was about to stand up and fight again when a hand pressed her down. Go find another opponent. Leave him to me. The voice was gentle, making one feel unprecedentedly relaxed. At the same time, one's confidence was restored. Limitless Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint nodded and turned to leave. Die! This bloodline divine warrior charged toward Limitless Sword Saint. With a gentle smile on his face, Limitless Sword Saint pointed out with a finger. Puff! Like a leaking balloon, the bloodline divine warrior rapidly shriveled and then exploded into ashes. Limitless Sword Saint, one of the 2 strongest ultimate sword saints of Sword God Palace. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.